For those of you that I have not yet met, my name is Ruth Citrin. I am Consortium Executive Director for the XCEPT Research Program, and pleased to be talking about methods with this panel from the very ground level through song all the way up to what you can see through a satellite, considering both the utility of these methods for researchers and for policy actors that are interested in getting access into place that is difficult to get insight on, as well as the ethics around this, because that's an important question that we often address. What I'm going to do very quickly is introduce our panelists and then move us swiftly through some opening remarks. We're going to break up the session so that we can encourage some discussion. I'll explain how we're going to do that in a minute. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So I'm here from London for the XCEPT program. Joining alongside me, and you've seen us both running around all day, is Aliya Souhaid. She is a experienced manager of programs in fragile and conflict-affected states. And she supports the design and delivery of the responsive research with our research program, where we've used and been testing remote methods alongside field methods. And she's recently managed research for FCDO under Ethiopia. We're thinking about West Africa. We're trying to support our researchers in integrating more of these methods into what are often viewed as more traditional qualitative and quantitative data collection tools. Sitting alongside Aliya, sorry, I have to have my glasses on, is Patta Scott-Villiers. I'm sorry if I mangled that. She is principal investigator for an XCEPT award on promoting peaceful pastoralism. You have heard some researchers talk throughout the day about elements of that research. That would have, Ikal, Simon, and Michael are all participating in that work. And that research is going to be an interesting sort of midway point between the local level ethnographic and the remote, because what they've been, and somebody earlier this morning, I'm making this my intro as well as the bios, somebody earlier this morning encouraged us to think more about participatory research. Well, this is exactly what the Institute for Development Studies has been doing alongside Ikal, Michael, Simon, and others who are working in communities on the ground, trying to think about how to generate new solutions to insecurity across the Kenya-Uganda border. Patta is a senior research and teaching fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, and she is known for her work on innovative research methodologies. Our final panelist you had heard from this morning, that is Joseph Diing Majok with Rift Valley Institute. He is a research consultant with RVI and has been with them since 2017, involved in numerous projects with XCEPT, having written and co-authored reports, policy briefs, and blog posts on cross-border livelihoods, labor migration, and militarization. Joseph holds an MSc in Africa and International Development from the Center of African Studies at the University of Edinburgh. And here's how we're going to sort of break down this session today. We're going to begin from the standoff, even though I want to emphasize this point that as a research program, and Aliya will probably say the same thing, we really encourage a mix of field methods and remote methods. What we're trying to get at are the best insights possible, innovating where we can, and using the breadth of 21st century technologies, as well as tools that have been used traditionally. This is where Aliya will start with some quick opening comments, and to liven up the room, some visuals to have you see a little bit of what this research feels like. Then we'll move to Patta to talk a little bit about the participatory research that IDS has undertaken with its local partners, in part because IDS and its partners are also thinking about how to integrate elements of the remote methods and satellite data into that action research at the community level. We'll pause from there and have a little bit of discussion. I know some of our fellow researchers from the Peace Rep program, I think Toby wants to offer an example from another project that's used remote and satellite data in Somalia. And then we'll come back to the ethnographic methods to really make sure we don't lose sight of this basic point. You can't let using remote methods drown out the voices, literally the voices in this case, of those on the ground, local level community actors. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it to Aliya to give us this opening presentation on remote methods.
Thank you, Ruth. So we're gonna quickly dive into what we like to call the data stack or the data cake. XCEPT's researchers and partners use different research methods, qualitative and quantitative, field and desk-based. An important starting point is that the choice of methods is essentially driven by the research question. It is problem-driven and it is not solution-driven. So it's not because we have increasingly access to remote research methods or to certain technologies that we want to use them or that it makes sense to use them every single time. So we'll be showing a couple of examples today of our work that looks at a combination of research methods, especially with Earth observation. A key point, however, is that we don't only use Earth observation. We rely on a layering of remote methods combined with field data. So first, for example, we often rely on open source data, such as news, social media, and this helps us build an evidence base. We also, again, look at Earth observation, which is typically known as well as satellite imagery, fire data. And this, for example, helps us to measure the extent of destruction or to estimate impacts on civilian populations. We also can now rely as well on signals data to track the effect of fighting on communities. So these help us answer questions such as, where are they going? Where are they moving? Through which checkpoints? So for example, traffic data, and you might all, for example, use your Google Maps and see when there's an orange line, this means there's traffic. And this kind of traffic data can be used, for example, to show us backup near a checkpoint. Anonymized GPS location data can help illustrate trade movements back and forth across borders. And obviously, the fourth and most important component of research methods is always field-based in all its forms. I'm just going to show two quick examples. The first one here is a report that you can find on our website. It's called Illicit Flows Fueling Armed Conflict Along the Borders Between Chad, Libya, and Sudan. So for this research, satellite imagery helped the researchers dig deeper on how armed groups exploit resources, in this case, gold and people. Imagery helped identify where mining sites overlapped with smuggling routes, and researchers looked at imagery over time to see how mining activities have expanded and changed. And we're even able to link that with other data, such as violence, such as conflict data or data from ACLED that shows different violence hotspots. And so, yeah, they were able to link this data with conflict patterns and armed actor competition. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the local insights field research contributed to. One of our satellite imagery or remote methods research partner often said that a pixel on a satellite imagery is equivalent to 1 kilometer squared. So if we are actually going to use this to look at the Earth, it's going to take millions of years. So obviously, it always starts with information we have from field sources. So along the same lines of how this research unfolded, satellite data was also helpful in another research we conducted in exploring the changing patterns of agriculture in conflict areas. So to inform, for example, humanitarian assistance and deepen understanding of the long-term impacts of conflict. Our researchers used it, for example, to analyze how cropping and planting patterns may have changed with shifts in territory control. Another quick example before I turn to Patta. Sorry, I'm going to... here we see how one of the XCEPT Research Fund awardees, ALSIS, did an incredible work pulling together field and remote data. They essentially used a 50-50 mix of remote and field methods and produced research showing how the Taliban altered the way they collected revenues and disrupted checkpoints. You can see here, for example, that one of the findings of the research was that perhaps there was an improvement in traffic management. This is obviously an uncomfortable reality. It is totally a different geography, but it begins to show us how we can use these methods together, field and remote-based, to actually contribute in the production of research analysis. In fact, their research was impactful and was a front cover in the Financial Times and other news outlets. Finally, I just want to end with a quick note about the XCEPT Research Fund that Lydia started speaking about earlier this morning. It is structured to offer us a mechanism to design, select, and commission research. And it always starts with the question of what is the research question? And we have partners alongside us that are able to work with different research organizations, with researchers, with governments, with anyone, to advise us on the best use of remote methods, what are the capabilities, how can we ensure value for money, not duplicate existing research, etc.
Thank you, Aliya. And before we turn to Patta, let me just make 2 additional points. And I think Aliya had said this, but I think it's important to really emphasize it. These kinds of methods work when you're trying to understand something that is happening right now, a crisis that's unfolding. They also work, and that was that example that she showed you about Libya, Chad, Sudan, gold mining and its intersection with human smuggling and migration of people and armed actors. It can be a project that unfolds, and this example too from Afghanistan, it can be a project that is longitudinal and unfolds over time. The point is these are just agnostic methods and you can use them in various ways. I'm recalling clearly that we talked about CWARN and early warning here in the morning, and this would be my last important point to raise before we move to the participatory action methods. Those experts that we work with that really know how to use these remote methods are saying something very clearly, which is they're agnostic, B, they are innovating at a very rapid rate, and they are moving very, very quickly in terms of the kinds of insights that they can offer using open data. And that's really important because what you really want, whether you're a researcher or you're a policymaker who needs to think about what your intervention needs to be, you want a common picture. And that common picture is shareable, and you can speak to it based on this raft of open data that is now available, so long as you are able to translate the question you're trying to ask into kind of a solution design, as Aliya noted, that allows you to merge it all with what you know on the ground and come up with a more comprehensive picture. From there, I'll turn to Patta.
Thank you, Ruth, and thanks everyone for your patience in this late hour. Okay, I'm going to just give you some quick highlights on the method that was used in the XCEPT study promoting peaceful pastoralism on the Kenya-Uganda border. It's working with pastoralists on the Turkana side and the Karamoja side. And why was this research done? Well, it was a situation of very severe insecurity. You heard Simon in particular earlier telling you that from a very personal and community perspective. And it's a situation that's extremely well researched. There's plenty of research on the Karamoja-Turkana question. Okay, and however, despite the fact that disarmament in 2010 had led to a period of peace, fundamentally underneath, there had been no solution. The conditions that were providing for really severe insecurity, which meant people dying and hundreds of thousands of cattle being raided in a commercial manner as well as a sort of more minor criminal manner, had not gone away during that time. So 4 years ago or so, the insecurity reappeared. So then Ikal, Simon from the area said, we need a new approach. And they got together with us at IDS. They got together with Michael and Alistair as policy analysts who understand a lot about all the different levels, from the geopolitical all the way to the local government, to work together on a new approach, a PAR approach. And the question that we began with was, how can communities, citizens, I always call them citizens, but then that, there's this question of, if you're in Turkana and you're moving across to Karamoja, you're still a citizen because you're a citizen of East Africa, but are you, being treated in the same way? So it's a really interesting question. But how can communities organize, cooperate, provide the knowledge, and start designing the solutions? So I'm going to tell you about who was involved. I'm going to tell you about the science of the work. And I'm going to tell you about how it creates action. And a little note on satellite, if we can be bothered. So here, I'm sorry you got moved to this, because I can see you're all looking very confused. But I hope you're going to quite like it. But just before I move on to this mysterious, here we are. Let's stay on the map. Sorry. The mysterious diagram. What I'd like to just say is who was involved. It's because this is very important in participatory research. In this case, we had teams from communities across Karamoja and Turkana, and they were mixed. They were mixed by the main axes of social and political difference. So we had, for example, we had Sagal, who's an older woman pastoralist who's lost several husbands to this terrible insecurity, but she's very active. We had Charity and Vicky, who are young graduates in Moroto, in Karamoja. We had Ewaton and Echor, who are pastoralist herders. We had Michael and Alistair, who are operating at the kind of regional level. We had Simon and Nikal, who you've seen, you've met, and we had me as a methodologist. And that's the team, it's a mix. And what does that do? The different standpoints, we've heard today about the prevailing order and how it looks to people from different standpoints. If you're on the ground, if you're someone in the sub-regional government, if you're someone at the regional level, you see things differently. So the research brings them together into dialogue, even within the research team. They have access, they can get to places and people say, oh, welcome, we know you. They have safety, they can work in these very insecure places, and they can work safely. And what's very important is the community people are, in some ways, the lead. They set the research question. So instead of the research question coming from a researcher from outside, it comes from within. And then as it begins to develop into a question of consensus between one part of the region and the other, one side of the border and the other, the research question becomes more and more refined, but it's coming from the people. And then the policy people start adding in, well, if that's the question, then we should go and speak to the Honourable Mohammed Elmi and talk about the Kenya government approach to drylands or whatever. So very important that the framing comes from the people. So now let's go to the graph. This is just about the science of this. Many people think participatory research is just anecdotal, that the people who do it are not professional. They are professional. They're professional inquirers. They're professional in the sense of their knowledge of the people and the places where they happen to be positioned. Now, someone called James Coleman developed this idea, which is that a lot of research and policy work works from the macro to the macro. So you have a situation, and I'll give you an example. In November last year, the government of Uganda came into Karamoja and made an announcement. And it said that there was a new phase of disarmament. So this was a macro event because it affected a lot of people. And what Coleman said was that often a researcher might then say, let's look at the situation today, 4 or 5 months later, and ask ourselves, how is the situation we have today? How did we get from that announcement to where we are today, which is one of worsened distrust between the people and the government, and a state of increased insecurity, more people dying, more cattle raiding. How do we get there? And what Coleman said is you have to get down to all the micro level decisions. Now, those aren't just at the grassroots. Lots of people make decisions when an announcement like that is made. They're also made by local government, they're made by IGAD, they're made by everyone. So Coleman's point was lots of people have a problem, and that's normally what's researched. But what's less researched is the process by which they respond, and then the process by which their response becomes the new normal. What happened in this case was that the Turkana found themselves having to cross back over the border from Karamoja into Kenya because they weren't feeling protected, they weren't feeling safe. And at the same time, the army had to demonstrate that it was responding effectively. And what it did was it arrested a large number of people from Kenya who still had arms and were still on the Uganda side of the border. Okay. And so you see that you had reactions, which is what's happening down here, which led to this state of affairs. And the people who were understanding that were the community teams, the policy analysts, because they were involved in not only doing the research, but looking for solutions. They were calling for meetings. They were members of the research team have brought pastoralists together within either side of the border, but also beginning across the border to try and calm the situation down. So just to say that the researchers, they're researchers, they're working in real time. They're part of the decisions about solutions, and they keep on researching. So just very quickly, we're going to move on to a quick example of satellite. And I thought you'd really like this picture at this time of day. Here's the place where they made the announcement about the fact that there was going to be a new disarmament, and where the people from Kenya, the pastoralists, decided they had to go back into Kenya because they wouldn't be safe if they had to give their arms back, if they had to do their own they couldn't do their own self-defense. And what this is a satellite vegetation cover. And what it shows, each one of those colored lines, is vegetation cover across the year, January on the left to December on the right. November is there. Now, if you look at that, the blue line, I think, is 2022. That very point of low vegetation cover was the same time as the government made its announcement. So it was a time of very bad pasture, pastoralists under extreme pressure. And yet they had to go back into Kenya where the grass was even less. Now, had it been one of these other years, they would have probably been under a lot less stress. So the effect of the announcement about the disarmament and the decisions they had to make about moving would have been quite different. So this is just to demonstrate to you about how satellite can give you a time or space overview. But the crucial thing is who has access to this data. We presented it to the community teams, and they were interested. But you need a lot of time to work on understanding this kind of thing if it's not something you're used to. So that's something to be said, that in terms of what you might call democracy or equality, the tools of research need to be in the hands of people in the community as much as they are in all the other kinds of researchers' hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Patta, for that example of the participatory action research at the field level and the way that you melded it with the the NDVI, the satellite data on growth and vegetation. And then there's an ethics point there that Patta is raising about who sets the question, who designs how you apply marry that question to the potential solution, and then who makes use of the data and in what way. Because we're running short on time, I'm going to adjust a little bit my original plan, which was to go to discussion a little bit after these two, and jump straight to Joseph Diing, because let's take all three different types of data collection and research together and come to that ethnographic method that he's going to talk about through collection of data through song.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon again, everyone. My talk on methodology will build on the presentation I just made this afternoon. So when conducting research on the same cross-border work, I presented a summary of it this afternoon. One of the ethnographic methods I used to gather the data was collecting traditional songs. So the question from some of you may be, why use traditional song in conflict research? So I understood that traditional song contain a substantial part that can be used as evidence in conflict policy research and also for accountability during transitional justice mechanism. As well, it's through songs where women with no formal education and who also lack any platform to share their experiences of conflict can speak out about abuses committed against them. Moreover, in a post-war period, after a long and protracted armed conflict, it is difficult for a researcher to understand what exactly happened to those affected, who was responsible and why. One way to collect stories of what happened during the war is to listen to traditional songs composed at the time by the people affected by the conflict. A little bit. Some communities have a tradition, and I think this is quite common across many communities in Africa. They have a tradition where they share with the public their bad experiences through songs. For example, from my work among the Diing people of South Sudan, women, more specifically, use songs to share personal account of their experiences with armed or gendered conflicts, the stories about women, about displacement, or another bad experience that they came across. Another way, they also use songs sometimes to provide a more localized and alternative perspective to challenge a narrative that is always established by the state or the conflict actors. So they have their own perspective and they communicate that through song. Song are also, through song, women can also question or even challenge the state or individual elites when they are not neutral in local communal conflicts, and also pressurize them to stop politicizing community affairs and so forth. So song are a strong platform where women with no formal education and who are lacking platform can communicate to people, and I think very little attention is being paid to that. And I think, however, this method has its own challenges. It comes with a lot of challenges as well. Traditional song collection is a bit time consuming and require a participatory approach from collection to translation and also to interpretation. So it comes with a lot of challenges. You have to identify songwriters, local songwriters. You have to work with them, cooperate with them, identify what songs and why we have to record it, and also the interpretation of a song. So this is also one of the challenges with this methodology. Uh, so this methodology also require a stronger relationship with the community. This is a question of trust. So it's not easier to just get into the community, gathered women or men, and ask them to record their songs about experience of the bad things that they did. So it comes back to you. And I manage this because I come from the same region and I also speak the same language. And I've also done a lot of work before I started collecting songs. And that built my trust with them to collect these songs. Another key challenge with this methodology is the ethical consent when it comes to consent. So there are some important songs, but the people who compose them are already dead. So who is to consent? So the consent cannot be enough sometimes. Some songs are commonly owned. Individual cannot claim ownership. And so if one person consent, it means that that consent is not enough, but it's a good methodology to think about, but it also comes with a lot of ethical concerns that have to be discussed, and we think about how can we navigate them and take songs as another useful methodology which we can use to complement our ethnographic research method we always use in our studies. So I think I will leave this to the Q&A session, so thanks.
Thanks, Joseph. I think it's a great third example for the session today, abbreviated though we've been, because it really offers a powerful indication of how you can transmit narrative memory of conflict, especially in a situation of protracted conflict, where the next generation may not really be carrying the experience of the prior generation. But this is a way to transmit, and B, I thought that was an exceptionally powerful point about whose voices get transmitted. And in this case, you give a platform for women who otherwise may not be heard. Thank you to our panelists for a really interesting set of presentations. Thank you for really stimulating comments, and I know we'll keep discussing this tomorrow.